My parents expect me to be happy for my sister, who is marrying my abusive ex-husband 2 years after our divorce. But they're upset I'm no longer sending them money. 2 years ago, I was married to a loser named Ron. I don't use this term lightly or out of spite, it's the only word that truly describes how toxic and draining he was as a partner. Without a doubt, he was the most emotionally, mentally, and financially exhausting person I've been with. The worst part is that back then, I was so blinded by love and hope that I gave him everything I had and more. It almost feels unbelievable to say now, but I literally put my blood, sweat, and tears into making our relationship work, only for him to take without giving anything in return. Ron and I dated for 3 years before getting married. During that time, he never held down a decent job. It was frustrating, but back then he at least seemed like he was trying. He took odd jobs here and there, claiming he was working towards something better. I chose to believe him because we were young, and I thought his ambition would eventually kick in. At least I learned, and here's my advice: never expect people to change unless it comes from within. If they don't want to change, they never will. Then life threw us a curveball. I found out I was pregnant. Neither of us expected it, as we weren't trying. I barely had time to consider my options before Ron started pressuring me to get married. He insisted it was important for our child to be born into a family. He said he wanted to do the right thing for me and the baby. At the time, it seemed like a romantic, honorable gesture. I thought the news of becoming a father would set him straight and finally make him grow up, but that didn't happen. Foolishly, I agreed to marry him, thinking it was the best decision for all of us. But if our relationship already had cracks, marriage turned them into massive gaps. Almost immediately after the wedding, things started falling apart. The small effort Ron had put into our relationship vanished entirely. His true colors began to show. Instead of stepping up as a husband and soon-to-be father, he seemed to think marriage gave him a free pass to stop trying altogether. Ron started spending every cent he earned on gambling or alcohol. This was a daily occurrence. He'd stay out late trying to win money gambling, something he wasn't even remotely good at. Meanwhile, I was pregnant, working full-time, and struggling to keep us afloat. I took on all the responsibilities: paying bills, managing household expenses, and preparing for the baby's arrival. If I ever thought Ron would change, I was wrong. He never helped. One night, I woke up feeling terribly ill. Panic set in when I realized I was bleeding. I knew something was horribly wrong. My first instinct was to call Ron for help, but as usual, he wasn't home. I called him repeatedly, hoping he'd answer. When he finally picked up, he outright refused to take me to the hospital, saying it was probably nothing and he wanted to stay out with his friends. In that moment, I realized I couldn't rely on him, not even in a life-threatening emergency. I had no choice but to drive myself to the hospital, trembling with fear and pain the entire way. The doctors confirmed my worst fear: I'd suffered a miscarriage. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I didn't know what to do. To make matters worse, when Ron found out about the miscarriage, he blamed me for the loss. He had the audacity to suggest it was somehow my fault, that my body had failed, or worse, that I had done something to cause it. I was already drowning in guilt, questioning every move I made during my pregnancy. And here was the man who was supposed to be my partner, pouring salt on my deepest wounds. Ron even told me that God had taken our baby and given it to someone who deserved it more. For weeks after the miscarriage, I lived in grief and shame. I was completely depressed, crying for hours in bed, unable even to go to work. Ron made no effort to comfort me or help me process the loss. Instead, he made me feel worse, as if I didn't deserve even basic compassion. He acted disgusted every time he saw me. I was the one who finally had to pull myself together and distract myself with work. Despite everything I was going through, I knew we needed the money. Ron had a job briefly, but he lost it due to downsizing. He was the perfect candidate to let go, always late, tired, and unproductive. After losing that job, things got even worse. Instead of using it as motivation to find new work, he gave up entirely. He spent all day, every day, at home playing video games, leaving dirty dishes, empty cans, and trash everywhere. He acted like cleaning wasn't his responsibility. He didn't lift a finger to help, not even the bare minimum. I felt so overwhelmed by the weight of everything that I came dangerously close to ending my life twice. Somehow, through sheer willpower, I pulled myself back from that abyss. Even when I was sick and completely exhausted, Ron still expected me to cook for him, clean up after him, and cater to his every whim. No matter how drained or unwell I felt, he demanded everything from me while giving absolutely nothing in return. If I brought it up, he'd either dismiss me entirely or, worse, get angry. One day, I realized something had to change. I couldn't keep sacrificing my life for him. When I finally mustered the courage to ask Ron for a divorce, he turned violent. He hit me hard. As if that wasn't enough, he took my car keys, phone, and wallet to make sure I couldn't leave the house without his permission. He threatened that he would never let me divorce him, that I had no choice but to stay and keep paying for everything no matter how miserable I was. But the next day, while he was asleep, I escaped. I ran to a neighbor's house and called the police. Thankfully, they came and Ron was arrested. Since it was his first offense, the court ordered him to take mandatory anger management classes, but that was it, no jail time, no significant repercussions for how he had treated me. Still, it gave me grounds to proceed with the divorce. After much back and forth, Ron delaying, manipulating, and making things as difficult as possible, I finally got what I wanted. Our divorce was finalized. I walked away without taking a single cent from him, not because I didn't deserve compensation for everything I'd endured, but because there wasn't a cent to take. As soon as it was over, I moved far away from him. Since then, I've completely cut off contact with Ron. Throughout it all, I only told my parents fragments of what was happening. I wasn't ready to share everything back then. Maybe I was ashamed, or maybe I didn't want to revisit the pain. But only after the divorce was finalized and I started to heal did I feel ready to tell them everything. When I opened up about what Ron had put me through, my family was shocked. My parents, especially, were devastated to learn what I had endured alone. My younger sister, Karen, also seemed sympathetic. Now, 2 years have passed since my divorce, and my life has changed dramatically. I have a much better job than I did before. With my more comfortable lifestyle, I've been able to send some money home to my parents. They're retired now, so I want them to enjoy their later years without financial stress. My sister Karen still lives with them. She dropped out of high school and has a troubled past. Karen has managed to stabilize her life somewhat. She works as a waitress at a local restaurant and lives with our parents to save on rent and expenses. I know the money I send home indirectly helps her, and I'm okay with that. At the end of the day, they're my family and I want them to be okay. This week, my parents called me with exciting news. Karen is getting married. Since I didn't even know she was dating anyone, this caught me completely off guard. Naturally, I asked who the lucky guy was. That's when I knew something was wrong. There was a long pause before they nervously asked me to promise not to overreact. Then they told me, Karen is marrying my ex-husband, Ron. I asked if they were joking. My dad likes that kind of joke, so I half expected them to laugh and tell me who the real guy was. But they weren't joking. My mom confirmed it was true and explained how Karen and the family hadn't told me earlier because they knew I'd be upset. Apparently, they wanted to soften the blow by waiting to share this big news. Then my mom went on to say that Karen and Ron had accidentally met a few months ago when Ron came into the restaurant where Karen works. What started as a casual encounter turned into a friendship. That supposed friendship quickly blossomed into a romance. According to my mom, it's only been a few months, but Karen and Ron are already madly in love. Not only had Karen started a relationship with him, but she had also decided to marry him, fully knowing he was my ex-husband and what he had put me through. Ron, the man who made my life a living hell, was now about to become my brother-in-law. I sat silently on the phone as my mom continued trying to convince me to accept their relationship. She said Ron seemed to have changed after attending anger management classes and that Karen believed in his ability to be a better person. My mom even mentioned how happy Karen seemed and suggested that if I saw her in person, I might be more understanding. She urged me to view this as a new beginning for everyone involved, including Ron. But all I felt was disgust. The very thought of Karen marrying Ron made me physically ill. I tried arguing with my mom, explaining that Karen didn't really know who Ron was. I told her that she and Dad should have talked sense into Karen, protecting her from someone as toxic and abusive as him. To my surprise, my dad admitted he had tried once or twice, but Karen was too happy to be convinced otherwise. Then my mom dropped another bombshell. She revealed that Ron had already met with them some time ago. During that dinner, he apparently spun a ridiculous narrative about how I was to blame for our divorce. According to Ron, I had made his life difficult and had him arrested for no reason. My mom said, "You always have to hear both sides." Despite me having a police report and photos of my injuries, she thought I might have exaggerated. My dad then chimed in, asking if maybe I hadn't moved on from Ron. He wondered if I was still in love with him, which would explain why I was struggling to accept his relationship with Karen. Of course, I had moved on, but this wasn't about unresolved feelings. It was about my sister bringing this toxic man back into our lives and my parents acting like it wasn't a big deal. When I told this to my dad, his response was infuriating. He said that if I'd truly moved on, I wouldn't have a problem accepting their relationship. He argued that Karen and Ron were adults and if they wanted to get married, it was their decision, not ours. According to him, I needed to stop making this about myself and should be happy for my sister, especially since Karen had been too afraid to tell me about her relationship with Ron earlier. They expected me to forget about my failed marriage and be happy that two wonderful people had found love. Hearing this only fueled my anger. Karen wasn't afraid because she thought I'd be unreasonable. She was afraid because, deep down, she knew this was wrong. She knew what Ron had done to me and still chose to be with him. Now everyone was trying to emotionally manipulate me into supporting them. When I realized that our conversation was going nowhere because they either wanted to believe Ron was innocent or didn't care what he'd done to me, I decided I'd had enough and ended the call. Since then, I've been thinking about this, and honestly, I don't care who my sister marries. But I won't be part of that family emotionally or financially. Do you think it's wrong for me to stop supporting my parents financially after this? Update 1. It takes vulnerability to share your story with the world, but I'm glad I posted on Reddit. I've received more support from strangers here than I ever did from my own family, which says a lot. Let me clarify something. I'm not just upset that Karen plans to marry Ron. I'm completely horrified that she would even consider being with a man like him in the first place, knowing everything I've told her. It's devastating to think that my own sister would consider being with him, let alone marry him. How can she justify being with a man like that? How can she think he's a safe or reliable partner after everything he's done? The worst part is that Ron has somehow manipulated not just Karen but also my parents into believing a twisted version of events. Or, as I've said before, maybe they just don't care about what he did to me. Whether they believe his lie that both of us were at fault in our marriage or they simply don't care about all the harm he caused me, it's equally painful. As her older sister, I care about Karen's well-being. Even though we've had our ups and downs like any siblings, I've always wanted the best for her. That's why the situation hurts so much. It's why I've tried to make them see how wrong this is on so many levels. This isn't even about her marrying my ex anymore, it's about the kind of person she's choosing to marry. I'm certain her marriage will be just as bad or worse than mine was. That's why I've decided to speak directly with Karen instead of going through my parents. This situation calls for talking to the ringleader, not the monkeys. That's why I've scheduled a video call with Karen this week. I need to speak with her directly about this. I need her to understand exactly who Ron is and what he's capable of, just in case she hasn't figured it out yet. I get that when you're in love, you tend to overlook a lot. I know because that's exactly what happened to me. That's why I want to do everything I can to help her. After that, it'll be her choice. Update 2. The video call with Karen didn't go as I hoped. Let me clarify, I expected it to go badly with her still wanting to marry Ron, but I didn't expect it to go this badly. I gathered all the evidence I had, including medical records documenting the abuse I suffered at Ron's hands. I'd never shown this to my family before, but I wanted to present irrefutable proof of the pain and suffering he caused me. This wasn't to make it about me but to warn Karen about the kind of man she was dealing with. I hadn't shown them everything before because I didn't think it would be necessary, but now, it seemed like it was. However, even after putting the evidence right in front of their faces, it still didn't seem to matter. The video call, which I thought would just be between Karen and me, started off badly because my parents were there too. Still, I went ahead with what I planned to do. At least this way, they could see the evidence too. I explained everything as clearly and calmly as I could. I told Karen that all of this could also be her future if she stayed with him. But instead of listening, Karen immediately got defensive. She argued that Ron had suffered as much as I had during our marriage and accused me of being an attention seeker. She claimed I was using my past experiences to gain sympathy from everyone. She said Ron had told her that I provoked him into acting violently and that I was wrong to call the police when he physically assaulted me. As if that wasn't enough, Karen went further and brought up a deeply sensitive subject, my miscarriage. She said maybe it was for the best that I lost Ron's baby since I clearly wasn't meant to be his wife or the mother of his child. There was my own sister using my most painful experience against me when all I wanted to do was help her. The only thing I noticed during the call was that my parents stayed mostly silent. When they did speak, it was only to try to calm us down rather than take a firm stance. They didn't defend me. Instead, they seemed more concerned with keeping the peace and siding with Karen. The only remotely rational thing my dad said was that he promised to keep a close eye on Ron to make sure he didn't hurt Karen like he hurt me. I asked how they planned to do that, and that's when he informed me that Ron was apparently going to move in with them after marrying Karen. I told him that was a terrible idea, disaster waiting to happen, but he insisted it was their house and their decision. He said it made sense for Ron to move into Karen's room after the wedding since they didn't have a place of their own yet. My parents claimed this arrangement would help Karen and Ron save money while also allowing them to keep an eye on things. I warned them that once they let Ron in, he would never leave. He's a parasite, plain and simple. As soon as he got comfortable, he'd find every excuse to stay, drain their money, and bring more problems. I asked my parents if they'd really thought this through. Did they truly believe Ron had changed? Did they think they could handle him better than I did, despite knowing all he'd done to me? My mom dismissed my concerns, saying maybe Ron just wasn't as in love with me as he was with Karen, and that's why things turned out the way they did. That was the last straw for me. I told my parents that if this was how they were going to handle things, I couldn't stand by and watch. I made it clear that I was against Ron and Karen's relationship and wanted no part of it. I told them that if they wanted to support this twisted relationship and let Ron move in, that was their decision, but I would cut ties with them entirely. I also informed them that I would no longer send them money. The stress is getting to all of us, and honestly, I don't know how much more we can take. I'm doing everything I can, but it never seems to be enough. I'll keep reading advice and ideas from my last post as well as those you leave here. I appreciate and read every constructive suggestion. This was something I'd been considering since my original post, but I had never discussed it with them. I didn't want to keep financially supporting my family if it also meant supporting Ron. When my parents heard this, they accused me of being childish and throwing a tantrum because I wasn't getting my way. They said the least I could do was continue sending them money to avoid looking like a bad daughter and sister. Karen chimed in, saying she planned to quit her job and focus on being a housewife for Ron. She said they needed my money more than ever since Ron still wasn't earning enough. I told her that if she wanted to live that lifestyle, Ron should be the one to finance it, not me. That's what men who want housewives are supposed to do. Karen screamed at me, accusing me of punishing them out of jealousy. She claimed I was cutting them off because I was jealous that she had what I wanted and couldn't let go of the past. If that's what she thought, so be it. I decided it was time to distance myself from them and my money. They could pay for this mess themselves. True to my word, I've completely cut ties with my family since that conversation. Update 3. It's been 2 months since my last update, and I'd like to thank everyone for their supportive messages and comments. I recently found out from some cousins that Karen and Ron broke up. Apparently, Karen caught Ron cheating on her just a week before the wedding. From what I've heard, she went completely ballistic on him. Knowing what I do about Ron, this doesn't surprise me at all. Of course, he's a liar, manipulator, and cheater. But I can't help feeling a small sense of vindication. I was right about him, he hasn't changed. The worst part is that during their confrontation, Ron hit Karen. Things got violent between them. I can't help but wonder what my parents think now, knowing they welcomed a violent man into Karen's life after seeing proof he had done the same to me. Best parents of the year, everyone. Since the breakup, my parents have been doing everything they can to get in touch with me. Apparently, they've been begging relatives to convince me to resume communication. Now that Karen and Ron aren't getting married, they want to fix things between us, ease tensions, and bring me back into their lives. As for Ron, he can't show up at my house. I live in a secure apartment with cameras everywhere. If he ever does, I'll have him arrested, and this time we'll make sure he goes to prison. Besides, he hasn't cared about me for 2 years, so I doubt he'd start now. Update 4. It's been 6 months since my last update, and I'm not sure if anyone is still following this story. I wanted to share that my parents recently emailed me, saying my dad had an accident and broke his hand. They claim some medical bills aren't fully covered by insurance and they've fallen behind on other payments. Now, they're asking me to pay for everything. They're also complaining that Karen isn't helping them at all, which, surprise, doesn't shock me in the slightest. What bothers me most is the sudden wave of apologies they're now sending me. Suddenly, they've realized how wrong they were months ago and how poorly they treated me. They've even admitted they should have listened to me about Ron and regret pushing me away. It's incredibly convenient that their apologies come now that they need money. I simply replied, "I told you so," and blocked their email address. I don't expect them to stop, but I can keep blocking any email they send. As for Ron, his second domestic violence charge earned him 6 months in prison, most of which he's already served. It only took hitting 2 women from the same family for the justice system to act. I wonder what he'll do when he gets out because Ron isn't exactly the kind of man who takes things calmly or reflects on his actions. Update 5. I received another email from my parents, and this one was particularly interesting. My dad wrote to me about a second medical bill he needs help paying. He was apparently badly beaten and had to spend a few days in the hospital, the injuries caused by Ron. Karen chimed in, saying she planned to quit her job and focus on being a housewife for Ron. She said they needed my money more than ever since Ron still wasn't earning enough. I told her that if she wanted to live that lifestyle, Ron should be the one to finance it, not me. That's what men who want housewives are supposed to do. Karen screamed at me, accusing me of punishing them out of jealousy. After getting out of jail, Ron showed up at their house to confront Karen for reporting him. My dad stood in the doorway to keep him out and ended up getting beaten. Ron was arrested again because Karen called the police. Hopefully, this means he'll get a much longer prison sentence than before. However, my dad's injuries required hospitalization, which brings us back to the email. After reading it, I blocked their latest email address as I'm not going to help them. They made their choices and now they can live with the consequences. I'd already told them I warned you in my previous reply, so there's nothing more to say. They'll have to figure out how to pay for their mistakes themselves. However, my dad's injuries required hospitalization, which brings us back to the email. After reading it, I blocked their latest email address as I'm not going to help them. They made their choices and now they can live with the consequences. I'd already told them I warned you in my previous reply, so there's nothing more to say. They'll have to figure out how to pay for their mistakes themselves. Regarding Ron, I've heard rumors that his latest arrest might add to more years to his sentence. Apparently, he violated a restraining order Karen had against him in addition to assaulting my father. While I can't confirm this officially, it's what I've heard from friends in the city who know about the situation. Honestly, it would be poetic justice if he gets a longer sentence this time. That's the end of my updates for now. I'm focused on my life, my career, and my new relationship. I've worked too hard to rebuild myself to ever look back. My family made their decisions and I've made mine. Thank you to everyone who followed my story, supported me, and reminded me that it's okay to put yourself first when others only bring toxicity. If there's more to share in the future, I'll let you know. For now, I'm moving forward.